Yeah, yeah. Ready? Just the clicker.
Yeah.
Ready. Go ahead. You're free to go ahead.
All right, everybody hear me? Hi. My name is Carey Nachenberg. The introduction was a little bit off. I worked at the for 21 years. Then it was a quick way to go Google to from the startup called Chronicle. Spun out of Google, bought that out of Google. And I was living for a year and a half. It was fascinating. And now I'm just a professor. So I thought this is some suggestions. What should we talk about? And one of the greatest acts of all time, which is Stuxnet. Now, when I was at Symantec, my teammates worked on this. I actually did not work with this, but I did tell the story because I didn't know about it. And so I think you'll find the story fascinating. How many people have heard of Stuxnet before? Okay. So you have this, great. And if you have it, you're going to be in first product. Fascinating story. So this is not really something that we talk about our guide question. And of course, the same as the novel. The cybersecurity thriller, so it's very happy. So here's cybersecurity, it's thriller, there's book, there's audio books, all of them. Audio narrated them. All right. So without further ado, let's talk about sex. So if you haven't heard about sex yet, there was a computer, people call it virus or sort of all of the above malware that was released by somebody. Who exactly was talking about that? To attack user ratings one of those rated, and somebody wanted to stop it. And this is the story of how people put malware to basically attack the Iranian. So without further ado, this is a photo of the Tom Iran. We sent the Google search set. So I'm going to go with that. And there are basically underground facilities for enriching uranium. Okay? And so you can see this is sort of obviously about it. Okay. And these are not in tons of centrifuges, but you can pretend like for also Google search. These are centrifuges. Centrifuges are used for spinning uranium support gas, which is the gas that actually is used to produce uranium. Okay. So imagine these are spinning tubes here. The inside spin, they basically separate out the uranium. And this is what a typical network is when you're doing uranium enrichment. Okay. So we have a PC, believe it or not, they're obviously very susceptible to malware. And those PCs run basically connected directly to what's called a PLC or programmable logic controller. And programmable logic controller is a system that has programmable logic for it. They control devices, control devices like a machine that produces ice cream, or a roller coaster, or animatronics, a Disneyland, or centrifuge. Now, the PLC is connected to a bunch of communications processors. They're basically routers. They can send signals to other devices like centrifuge. And those routers are then connected to frequency converters, which are used to convert the frequency. For instance, the input hertz of electricity up or down in order to spin these devices backwards. And then we finally answer. Now, so basically, but basically, as it turns out, the rep is using standard PC running software called Step 7, from Siemens Corporation. The PLC, especially hardware, multiple devices, others here, frequency converters. They basically step up or down the frequency, and then it's okay. So, what is uranium hexafluoride? Well, that's sort of what it looks like, and it's negative. And if you add hydrochloric acid to it, you can actually produce the gas. Okay? And you get uranium hexafluoride gas, which is 99.3% uranium, 0.7% uranium. And then 2% uranium 58, 0.7% uranium. And guess what? It's useful stuff. Uranium 2. Okay. So what you do is you're going to basically try to separate out the good stuff that you want in order to use the power, rich uranium from the bad. Okay. Now, this is how they're isolated. Both these divided ones, and we're isolated as far as we know. Okay, so what do we mean by air gap? Means there was no network connection inside. A wireless connection, no nothing. And there's also there were lots of guards. Okay. There's the guards there. We have the research network, maybe in the left. We have the enrichment network. Two are separated, no wires or anything. Okay. Now this is a picture first of somebody who might be in the low fraud, who might not, but it looks good. Low fraud, right? And you know, he might be a programmer that works for Israel because Israel probably work on. And what he wants to do, or these people like him to do, is they wanted to introduce a digital hand grenade onto the computer right there. It sets up machine they control the enrichment. Okay. And then how that impacts all of the devices.
Like audio issues. Say something.
Say something. I am saying something.
Okay, say something.
Say something.
Okay, you're good.
We're good?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so the question is, we have this Mossad programmer, or somebody we suspect is a Mossad programmer, who wants to basically get this digital hand grenade. Uh-oh, we need to go back to the presentation. Sorry. Difficulties. Oh. Just click on this, click on the slide. There you go. Okay. Oh, no, not yet. Okay. Okay, there we go. So how exactly does this spy, effectively, or somebody who works for intelligence services, get that digital attack onto an air-gapped network to disrupt these centrifuges? How? It's got to, whatever he puts on there has to spread on its own, because whatever he's going to do, he cannot get to the intercentrifuges himself, right? So the threat has to spread on its own until it finds the proper computers. It doesn't want to activate on just any computer. It has to find the computers that are actually running the centrifuge, where it can then disrupt the centrifuges. So it has to then perform disruption, all while evading detection. Because if it's detected right away by antivirus software or any other software they have, it's not going to be able to do its job. Okay, so let's talk about each of these things and how Stuxnet accomplishes. So first of all, it's got to spread on its own. So Stuxnet used 7 different mechanisms to spread itself. Now, the typical piece of malware might use 1 or 2. 7 different mechanisms to spread itself. Okay, and we'll talk about each of them. So first of all, it would basically, if it were running on a computer, it would copy itself onto other file shares. So it would enumerate the network, find other computers on the network, and if they had their file systems open, file shares open, it would then copy itself over to those file shares. Okay, so that's one way it would spread if it could get onto one computer. Now, by the way, we're talking right now about the research network, right? In other words, whoever introduced this could never get into the air-gapped network. So they somehow introduced some threat onto some computer in the research network, which then spread maybe to another computer on the research network. Okay. Second, it attacks a hole, or attacked a hole in Windows Principal. So basically, there was a buffer overflow or some type of attack, related attack on Windows Principal. And so what this allowed it to do is spread to, for instance, machines that were used as printer servers. Okay. It attacked another hole in Windows RPC. That allowed it to spread to yet other computers, so for instance, servers. It password cracked the Siemens database software. So as it turned out, the Siemens database software had a default password in the default installation, which nobody really changed, at least we suspect, in the Iranian computers. So what it did was it would actually connect to the database software, upload a copy of itself to the database, because the database could store file blobs, and then basically launch it through the database. Think about that. Okay, so another way to spread. It also infected PLC data files from Siemens. Now, what's a PLC data file? How many people are familiar with Visual Studio here? Like, or for instance, or Xcode, right? Those are development environments, and they happen to have data files that hold your project information, right? In other words, you have a data file that specifies what source files are in your project, what header files in your project. Well, what Stuxnet did was it found these development files used by the integrated development environment from Siemens, and it injected itself into the project files that are used to manage all the source code. So if you happen to copy those project files with the source code for running a centrifuge, well, you'd also copy a copy of Stuxnet. Okay? So that's another way it would spread. So simply by sharing your project data files that what you think just contain source code, you're now sharing a copy of Stuxnet as well. Okay? It also, as if that wasn't enough, had peer-to-peer updates. So if any peer could get onto the internet and get an update from the central server, it would then propagate that update to the other peers. So for instance, let's imagine this computer, and only this computer was on the internet, it would actually retrieve the latest update, which it can update itself every day, every hour, whatever, and then it would then update each peer, and each peer would update the other peers. Isn't that crazy? So it basically had a self-updating mechanism, and if there were new versions or bug fixes, those could be added too. Now if you think about it, the centrifuges are air-gapped from the network, so how could it jump? Because right now we've just infected the entire research network, but how did it get to the centrifuge computer over here running Step 7 software? Well, USB drives, because in addition to all the things I talked about, it would also spread on USB drives, okay? So Stuxnet, if it finds a thumb drive on a device, insert it into the device, it will automatically copy itself onto the device. Okay. So for instance, if you inserted this thumb drive into that computer, which was just infected, well, guess what? Stuxnet's going to copy itself on that thumb drive, and it will actually copy itself in a manner that causes Windows to auto-execute it the next time that thumb drive is stuck into another computer. So if somebody, for example, were to copy the project files or something over to this computer, or even just copy some data over, it's going to infect the thumb drive. The moment it's inserted into this new computer, it's now infected. Okay. Now, what's interesting is 6 of the attacks, of these types of attacks I just told you about, targeted backdoors or flaws that were unknown to the security industry at the time this attack took place. So these are called 0 days. Now, typically you have no 0 days in an attack, right? Most malware does not use any 0 days at all. To use 1 0 day would be very noteworthy. To use 2 0 days would be a state-sponsored attacker. To use 6 0 days is unprecedented. So 6 of the attacks could never have been stopped because they weren't even known. Okay, so usually we're surprised when we see a threat targeting 1 0 day. It's not known. Okay, so that's how it spread. Now we know how it got around. Okay, and we know that it probably got into the air-gapped network via a thumb drive over the sneaker net, right? Somebody brought a thumb drive over with some data. Now it has to discover the right computer to attack, because it's possible, like all those computers that it actually was spreading on were not the computers that it wants to start attacking. If it starts doing something that looks like an attack on another computer, it might be detected. So it has to wait until it has found the magic slipper, Cinderella's magic slipper. It knows exactly that this is the thing I need to attack. How does it do that? So Stuxnet is super picky, and it only activates its payload, which is to disrupt these centrifuges, when it's found an exact match. Because imagine if this somehow spread, which it did, by the way, started spreading on the internet. It was very effective at spreading, and it actually got out of Natanz and got out of other places. So what if it got to Disneyland and found these PLCs, right? It could, because those are used to run, rides in, in amusement parks. Or what if it, hit another amusement park, right? What if it hit a robotic system? So it had to be very, very picky to make sure that it didn't attack just any system that had a programmable logic control. So what did it do? Well, this is how it fingerprinted. it said the targeted computer had to be running the step 7 software from Siemens. So that was requirement number 1. If step 7 software wasn't on the targeted computer, then it knew this was not Natanz, and it was going to just not do anything, effectively just try to spread to other computers. In addition, the targeted computer had to be directly connected to a model S7315 PLC, also from Siemens. So they knew whoever built this was inside and knew the model numbers of the PLCs, that were used in this environment. And it actually would fingerprint the model number of the device. It would talk to the device and say, "What's your model number?" The PLC, it would further check what it was connected to, and that PLC had to be connected to at least 6 network modules that are CP342.5 network modules, also from Siemens. So it's further fingerprinting what's connected to that controller on those routers. What do those routers look like? If those routers were not the right routers, and there weren't 6 of them, it wouldn't do anything. And each network module, further fingerprinted, had to be connected to about 31 Faro, Playa, or VACON NX frequency converters. Okay, because there are many different types of frequency converters, but these are the ones that it checked for. Okay, so it knew exactly what computer it was on, knew exactly what they were connected to, and exactly what they were connected to, and so on, all the way down to the frequency converters that stepped up or down the frequencies to run the centrifuge. I mean, think about the intel they had to get in order to do this. Pretty amazing. Okay. Now, if you do the math, which you didn't, but I'll just tell you, Stuxnet verified that it discovered a PLC connected to 6 of those routers, connected to 31 roughly, it's not exactly, but 31 of these frequency converters. And if you do the math and look at the actual numbers, it would verify that it was connected to exactly 155 end devices and frequency converters. It had to be connected to that number or it wouldn't activate. Okay? And recently, we learned that Iran's uranium enrichment cascade, recently being done many years ago, basically used 160 centrifuges. So it was fingerprinting that there had to be a certain number of things connected to or it wouldn't activate. So this was very tailored to the environment it was attacked, which is good. What a coincidence, right? I wonder how the people who built this knew there were exactly this many centrifuges and these types of devices. Obviously, they had somebody on the inside or somebody on the inside of Siemens who was getting this intelligence because they were the contractor for Iran. Okay. Or other, actually, I don't know if Siemens was the contractor, but other contracting companies that might use Siemens hardware, have basically broken into that. Okay, so now we know how it's discovered the proper computer. We know how it knows whether it's found the right computer. Now it gets down to business. And this is where things get really interesting. Okay, so Stuxnet has infected the Windows PC there with step 7. And right now it's just a Windows thread, right? Just spreads from Windows over drive shares and thumb drive and so on. What it then did was it downloaded some logic onto the PLC hardware. So think about this. Okay, so it downloaded some logic onto PLC hardware. Now, if you haven't thought about it, the PLC hardware is not Intel hardware. It's not Windows. It's embedded hardware. Right? It's probably running a RISC microprocessor or something. This is a totally different architecture. Okay, so we probably didn't realize is the PLC, means that Stuxnet had to be a multi-platform threat. It wasn't just a threat for Windows. It was a threat for Windows and a threat for this type of PLC, which had to deal with the instructions and the computer architecture of this additional device. So this is the first known threat that we know of that targeted industrial control microchips and Windows for that matter. Okay, pretty amazing. Okay? So there was actually 2 binaries, if you will, a binary within a binary to soak it up with this. Okay. Next, Stuxnet wanted to continue fingerprinting because what if those 160 or 151, whatever it was, frequency converters were connected to, like Space Mountain and all the roller coasters. Like that could be bad. So it then did a bunch of profiling. For 13 days, Stuxnet would sit on this PLC and monitor what frequencies, basically all of the frequency converters were running at. Okay, so it would monitor the operation for 13 days, doing nothing at all. So as these devices, as these routers are sending back information, okay, Stuxnet is monitoring that information and making sure that it knows exactly how fast these things are running. Okay, Because if they're not running the right speed, it's not going to try to attack. It made sure that the motors, the frequencies of the motors was between 807 and 1210 hertz. Right now, what is that frequency range? Well, that's coincidentally the frequency range required to run centrifuges and nothing else. Okay? You would not run a roller coaster on those frequencies. Okay? And after all, whoever wrote Stuxnet wouldn't want to take out like a roller coaster. Now, there's an interesting story by my friend Eric, who I used to work with at Symantec, who did the analysis on Stuxnet with a team of people. They had discovered, they were reverse engineering the code for Stuxnet, and they found a reference to the model number of these frequency converters. And at the time, they tried to look it up in Google searches. They couldn't find any information on it. So they posted, if I recall, a notice onto a blog or some website saying, hey, does anybody know about this model of frequency converters? What frequencies does it run in? And somebody came back and said, oh, those frequency converters run between 807 and 1210 hertz. And then Eric Googled what things run, or what types of things run at frequencies of 807 to 1210 hertz, and found out that basically the only thing is uranium enrichment. And at that point, Eric started looking under his car for bombs. It's a true story. Literally, he would every day when he would go back to his car after work, he would look over the car, make sure nothing was going on. Because this is not just malware. We see millions or saw millions of pieces of malware per year. This was malware that was targeting a device that is only used to enrich uranium. So this is real stuff. Okay, so not roller coaster. Okay, now once Stuxnet spent 13 days figuring out what it was connected to, and that it was connected to the right devices, it would then begin its mission. Okay, what it would do is, it's reminding me to brush my dog's teeth, which I can't do right now. And let me tell you, that's a challenge. It's almost as difficult as getting into Natanz with Stuxnet. Okay, so what Stuxnet does is it raises the spin rate to 1410 hertz for 15 minutes. Now, imagine, like why I would do this, right? So right now it's running at, let's say, 1200 or 800 or 900 hertz. So it sends a command to all these routers, basically, or frequency converters saying, hey, run at 1410 hertz for 15 minutes. And these things start spinning really, really fast. Can you imagine? They probably sound crazy because they never spin this fast. It's way above their operating limit. And then 15 minutes later, everything stops. So imagine if you're the guard or the researcher, on duty, right? And you're wondering, and everything starts making noise. And then you're like, what's this? You go out to get somebody, and by the time you come back, everything's fine. Okay, so that's what it started doing. 15 minutes. Then it slept for 27 days. Not 27 hours, not 27 minutes, 27 days. So if anybody investigated, they would never know what was going on because everything was back to normal. Then it would slow the spin rate to 2 hertz for 50 minutes after 27 days. Now, can anybody guess why it would slow the spin rate to 2 hertz? 2 hertz is like, about like that. Okay, there you go. Maybe a little faster than that. I get dizzy if I did more. Okay, why would it slow the spin rate to 2 hertz? Yeah.
It's also right because it's slightly different density. You're slowing it to that so that the centrifugal force.
Oh, definitely. The centrifugal force would definitely
So
disappear.
the two materials, basically the two materials,
They would mix back together, but that's not why we think. That's absolutely reasonable, but that's not why we think they did 2 hertz. Because why didn't they do 20 hertz or 600 hertz would probably be enough to let it separate. Yeah. Yeah, so now you're getting the idea. So basically, think about spinning a top. When a top spins, if it's really fast, it's going to go for a long time. But when a top starts slowing down, what does it do? It wobbles, right? So these centrifuges, the hypothesis is that they want to slow it down to such a point it would start wobbling and start damaging, the infrastructure. Yeah. I don't know why they would just wouldn't do the 2 hertz, but maybe doing the 2 hertz causes damage to the devices, and then the 1500 hertz causes more damage, to both directions. I don't know. Yeah, presumably whoever did this had access to centrifuges and they realized that both operating points were important. Okay, so it sends a message out and it takes it down to 2 hertz for 50 minutes. And then back up and everything's the same. And people are probably wondering what's going on. Why are these things, so slow? What's going on? And then sleeps for 27 days, rinse and repeat. This is it. This is what it did. Over and over. Okay. So imagine if you're running those and there's a ghost in the machine because everything's fine 99% of the time, and then all of a sudden you don't know what's going to happen. Boom, bad stuff happens. Okay. So as we said, why spin the motors up to 1400 hertz? Well, actually, I forgot to mention this. 1380 hertz is a resonance frequency. Okay, so resonance frequency for these centrifuges. I haven't given this talk in a couple of years, I apologize. This is a resonance frequency. And so resonance frequency means, if you ever had a resonance frequency when you're driving on the road and everything starts vibrating very, very, a lot in your car, well, imagine a centrifuge, it gets just the right frequency and starts like shaking to the point where it might explode. Okay, so that's why they went higher. Okay, and it's believed that operation at that frequency for even a few seconds could result in disintegration of the enrichment tubes. And 2 hertz, as we said, would cause wobbling, which would potentially also damage the tubes. See, I forgot this stuff too, I'm relearning. Now, you might wonder, what about the ringing fail-safe systems? Because surely, by now, you're thinking that an alarm would go off if the frequency went out of range. Of course, why wouldn't an alarm go off? It's an enrichment plant, right? So maybe Stuxnet pulled a Mission Impossible. So like you've seen these Mission Impossible movies where something's happening on the right. Okay, hold on one second. Something's happening on the right. There's a photo that's preventing anybody from seeing what's really happening, and somebody's monitoring here on the left, and everything looks fine. Nothing's actually happening, right? Maybe it did something like that, right? Yeah. But in fact, that's exactly what it did. Digitally, though. So what does Stuxnet do? These systems, as far as we understand it, did have fail-safe mechanisms. So if the things were spinning too fast or too slow, it would have sent out an alarm. And there would have been an alarm on the Windows PC, which would have somehow notified people. It would trigger a shutdown if the frequency would go out of range. Okay? So, worry not, Stuxnet took care of this. Now, how did it do this? Well, during the time when it is not causing damage, it would just record the frequencies that the existing systems would operate. So it would say, oh, they're running at 900 hertz or 1200 hertz or 1100 hertz. It would record this data. Okay? So watch. As the systems are running, Stuxnet keeps a log of the performance indications. How fast is it running? What frequencies? How's it changing? Kept a log of that. Then, when it launches the attack and sent it to 1400 hertz or 2 hertz, it would replay the original recordings to the Windows computer so that they wouldn't know that it was actually really running fast or slow. So watch, they send the attack out. The systems are running super fast, 1500 hertz. All the super fast telemetry is coming back, but they're intercepting it and playing back the telemetry from normal operation. So none of the fail-safe systems would have seen that anything was wrong. Think about the complexity. Not as complex as ChatGPT, don't get me wrong, but pretty impressive. And Stuxnet also disabled the emergency kill switch on the PLC. So if you were to hit the big red button on the PLC, right, that big red button up there, nothing would happen if you tried to shut it off. Okay, pretty impressive, right? Okay. Now, question? Well, the hardware, as I understand it, was connected to, there is a hardware thing, but that was connected via software to all the PLCs. Because remember, you have 150 something, 160 frequency converters and so on. There can't be a hardware connection, as I understand it.
The first kill switch went straight to the PLC. Where did it go down through?
I believe it went straight to the PLC, but I could be wrong. But they actually had software that basically rewrote, effectively modified the PLC logic so that it would, intercept it. We can find out more if you want to get the guys that did the analysis and okay. All right, so now it evaded detection. How did it evade detection? So as if the 6 spreading mechanisms that were 0 days wasn't enough, it used 5 different mechanisms to evade detection. 5. Okay. So number 5, Stuxnet hid its own files on infected thumb drives using rootkits. Okay. So basically, if Stuxnet was on a thumb drive, okay, this is what would really be on the thumb drive. If you actually were able to look at all the files, for instance, if you took this to a Linux computer and looked at all the files, this is what you'd see. All of these files up here were the Stuxnet files. And there's actually multiple files that Stuxnet spread with when it copied itself to a thumb drive. But if you actually plug this into a Windows computer, because Windows would process these files, okay, on top here, they would cause an attack, which would then run a rootkit on Windows. And this is what you'd see. So within a fraction of a second of sticking that thumb drive in, one of the files here on top would launch, or basically be triggered. Windows would open it. Windows would be attacked. The rootkit would take place, or basically install itself. Rootkit would then, intercept file system calls, and this is all you'd see. That's number 1, or number 5 rather. Number 4, Stuxnet inhibited different behaviors in the presence. Oh, actually, here's a question for you all. Why do you think there are multiple versions of these files? As I told you, one of these files would be opened by Windows, and it would then attack Windows and get into the file system and effectively hide these files on the thumb drive. Why are there multiple versions of these files? Yeah. Different versions of Windows, very good. So each of these files was tailored towards a different version of Windows, which had a slightly different memory architecture and, that would need to attack. And so each one basically slightly different, and each version of Windows would open all the files, but only one of them would actually trigger the attack on that version of Windows. That's right, very good. Okay, so here we go. All right, so 4, Stuxnet inhibits its behaviors in the presence of different security products to avoid detection. Okay. So think about this. Imagine you had, here we go, I used to work at Symantec endpoint security, you had Kaspersky internet security, and McAfee total protection, some common security products. Well, Stuxnet would determine which antivirus software was running on that computer of dozens of potential antivirus software products, and it would then inhibit which activities it would perform, attacks it would perform, based on what software was there, so that it wouldn't trigger any alarms. So that, in the presence of Symantec, it might eliminate attacks A and C, and only do B and D in order to not trigger the antivirus software. And with Kaspersky, it might inhibit only attack B because it can get away with A and C and D. And with McAfee, probably wouldn't inhibit anything because McAfee can't detect anything. Sort of a McAfee Symantec joke, I'm sorry. It might inhibit B. Okay, sorry. I can't help myself. I'm still, I can't help myself. So it avoided doing certain things with each antivirus product or security product in order to trigger their detection. Number 3, Stuxnet completely deleted itself from USB thumb drives after it infected 3 computers. So if you stuck that thumb drive in computer 1, 2, and 3, the 3rd computer would cause it to delete itself off that thumb drive, so that if you were to look at the thumb drive after that, you would find nothing. Okay, so it affects computer 1. It then goes and affects computer, let's do it again. I have a lovely animation, it's just slow. It affects computer 1, affects computer 2, affects computer 3. The moment it starts running on computer 3, it disinfects the thumb drive, so you would never find it on the thumb drive. Again, hiding its, hiding its footsteps. Number 2, Stuxnet's authors, this is a good one, digitally signed it with stolen certificates, so it would look like legitimate software. Okay, so how many people know what digital signatures are? They're certificates, right? Okay, good. So basically, whoever built Stuxnet hacked in to a company called Realtek, another company, and somehow got their signing certificates that are used to digitally sign software, basically a stamp of authenticity, a cryptographic stamp of authenticity. And they put that stamp of authenticity on Stuxnet, so it looks like it came from a legitimate software vendor, that wasn't just software that wasn't uncertified. Okay, and these two certificates were stolen from Realtek and a company called J Micron, which both happen to be, as I understand it, in Taiwan, a couple blocks from each other. Wonder if this was what was going on. But somebody had to go in there in both of these companies and get their certificates, which are usually highly protected, in order to use them to sign Stuxnet. Now, number one, this is a really good one. I mean, I gotta say, it's very impressive. Stuxnet concealed its changes to the programmable logic controller. So if you recall, I told you that Stuxnet not only spread on Windows computers, but when it found the PLC, it injected its software onto the PLC. It actually added code to the programmable logic controller. What it would do, though, is it would hide those changes. Okay, so for instance, here I have my Windows PC running Siemens software. Here I have my PLC. Okay, maybe the Siemens software would have basically some, some code here. We can see, be running on the PLC during normal operation, spin at 1064 hertz. In case of emergency, spin down to 0 hertz. Okay. Now, if you looked on the PLC, not on what the Windows computer was telling you the PLC would be doing, it says instructions to the centrifuges, and during normal operation, spin at 1400 hertz, and in case of emergency, ignore operator commands. So basically what was happening is the PLC was infected. It had this logic. If you use the Windows computer to ask the PLC what the logic was, this is what you get back. So it would hide all of the changes. And if you use the development software to say, hey, tell me what's on the PLC, it would tell you it's normal. This is the software that was originally on the PLC. And if you uploaded a new version of the PLC control software from the Windows computer, it would infect it on the fly, reinfecting it as it was sent to the PLC. So if you change the software, it would reinfect it. If you looked at the software on the PLC and said download it back to Windows, it would give you the original software. It would infect on the fly down, disinfect on the fly up. Wow. Pretty impressive. Like, so many things that can go wrong, but it all went right. All right. So did it succeed? Based on some clever engineering, we had some interesting data. Stuxnet, as it turns out, contacted 2 command and control servers every time it runs to report its progress, where it is. And we think that this was done in order to help the attacker know whether they had gotten into, for instance, a research network in Iran or elsewhere. Because as it turns out, Stuxnet was spreading in the wild all over the world. Okay, so they wanted to check where it was. Okay. Now, the websites were located in these 2 countries. Okay, more in Europe and in Asia. Okay, and basically every copy of Stuxnet that could get on the internet was basically calling back and saying, "Hey, I'm on this network. I'm on this network." So, working with domain registrars, Symantec at the time took control of these domains. So then Symantec was receiving every connection from every copy of Stuxnet in the world and could track exactly where they were. Okay. So basically they relocated them to Cupertino and they were able to figure out where it was. Another fact, as Stuxnet spreads between computers, it keeps an internal log of every computer it's visited. Isn't that interesting? It actually kept a log. So inside the executable, it would actually update the executable in order to say, hey, I was on this IP address and this IP address, and keep that information on every computer infected. So what would it look like? Well, imagine we have these computers with these IP addresses. So it has a visited list that embeds in itself. Okay, and the moment it goes onto a computer and infects the computer, it basically adds on the computer's IP address to itself. Okay, and then spread to another computer, it would add on the IP address. And so you can get a history of every device, every computer attacked by Stuxnet if you could just get a copy of Stuxnet. Got it? So you can basically capture Stuxnet, get a copy of it, get many copies of it. Each one will be different depending on the set of computers it spread to. Okay? So you can see there's a history. Okay, so it's forensic information that could be used. Okay, so here's what else we found at the time. There were apparently, at least at the time, 3 attack waves with different binaries, different compile times, different infection times, because the infections were stamped when the infection happened, right? And then it was called back. And the time between the compilation of the binary and the in other words, inside each binary is a timestamp of when the program was created. Between the time frame between the compilation time and the infection time was as little as 12 hours. So think about that. They compiled this, they got it working, they sent it out. That must have been a real hurry, right? In some cases, it might be 6 days later they released it, 22 days later, and so on. But they released this, there were many different versions of it. And capturing the executable files, which were submitted to Symantec, we were able to see sort of how the sample spread. So we know, like, for instance, the zero, basically the patient zero sample, and then we can capture each of these lines as a file that spread to many different computers, right? Because we can see all the computers it spread to, and you can see, in other words, where they spread around the internet. So it was sort of interesting stuff to be able to. In terms of geographic distribution of infections, you can see mostly Iran, but other countries as well, including the United States, because whether it was intended to or not, it was very good at spreading, and not just on computers that were running PLCs, but just everywhere. And so it actually spread all around the world, unintentionally, almost certainly. Stuxnet, when it reported to the web that it was on a computer, it would also report whether the Siemens software was on a computer. Okay, so whether that's Step 7 software that's used for controlling PLCs. And so basically, most of the PLCs that it did hit were in Iran, although also places like South Korea, United States, and UK, and so on. All right, so did it succeed? Well, indications are, at the time at least, that it did. So the telemetry that we collected at the time indicated that they didn't try to get directly into Natanz. What it looked like is they tried to get into a contractor that was working with Natanz. So some company that did contracting with PLCs, they infiltrated them, 5 industrial companies to be exact, with potential subcontracting relationships to the plant, to Natanz. Those companies then likely, although there could have been spies, but they likely unknowingly went in to the Natanz facility as contractors doing legitimate jobs and then infected Natanz with a thumb drive or some other way. And the Institute for Science and International Security, which studies these things, wrote at the time that around 2009 or 2010, about 1,000 centrifuges were disrupted and maybe taken offline, semi-permanently or permanently, of 9,000 deployed at the site. So they did a fair amount of damage, which is pretty amazing. Okay. Finally, questions? Who did it? Well, we suspect, and I told you in the beginning that the Israelis had part of this. But how do we know? Well, there's one possible way that we might be able to guess this, and this is sort of a conspiracy theory, so don't take this too seriously. But this number, 1979-0509, was embedded into a copy of at least some of the versions of Stuxnet. And according to Wikipedia, you can read this as a date, right? May 9th. On May 9th, 1979, Habib, and I can't pronounce his last name, but El-Hanian, I guess, was executed by a firing squad in Tehran, sending shockwaves through the closely knit Iranian Jewish community. He was the first Jew and one of the first civilians to be executed by the new Islamic government. This prompted a mass exodus of once 100,000 member strong Jewish community to Iran, which continues to this day. Who knows if this is a reference, but maybe it is. Okay, but there's another hint. Now, the timestamp in every Windows executable that's built, remember, Stuxnet ran on Windows, is added by the compiler. So when you compile a program, there's a timestamp put in there in local time. Local time. In other words, if we're in the Pacific Coast, it would be Pacific Standard Time. The timestamp would be put in there, the time when you compile the program. Well, as it turns out, and apparently the people who built Stuxnet did not know this, but the Symantec guys knew this, gals. The compiler also added a GMT timestamp. Okay, this is just done by the compiler. So the compiler would also say, hey, at GMT time, which is universal time, this is when the program was compiled as well. Now these two times are effectively the same, right? One is just in GMT, one of just his local timestamp, Eastern Standard Time, whatever, right? But if you take the 2 timestamps, you can figure out what time zone the local time is in. And it turned out that it was in GMT plus 2. So there was 2 hours after GMT. We're 8 hours before GMT, I think it is, right? This is 2 hours after. I wonder what countries are 2 hours after GMT, right there in the green. Well, as it turns out, lots of places like South Africa, or, you know, and also Israel. So we can just guess. All right, so there's some evidence that it was from Israel. There's also evidence it was from the United States. Been discussed. So to conclude, and I know this is an old story, but it's such a good story. It's so amazing that people did this. Even today, doing this would be extremely difficult. To conclude, so Stuxnet is, you know, really signaled a fundamental shift in the malware space, right? And even at the time, but still, like, we haven't seen anything this advanced, to my knowledge. This, you know, across systems, architectures, is amazing. Improved cyber warfare against physical infrastructure is totally feasible, and the same attack technique can be used to attack other physical and virtual systems. Unfortunately, luckily we haven't seen much of it, but it's pretty unbelievable. Okay, and that's my talk. So I'm happy to take questions. Yeah, question up here, and then go.
Why, Stuxnet, like, add all of that logging and all of that stuff that are embedded in itself? Because even that, when you're doing an attack, you want the least amount of leftover stuff.
Right. So the question was, why did Stuxnet? Do we have an indication why Stuxnet kept all these attack lists that, you know, who every machine it attacked, because you want to minimize that information to hide where it's been? It's not obvious, and nobody knows. Like, you know, I could give you guesses, but they would just be guesses. So we don't know why. I would guess for debugging. You know, initially they probably forgot to remove it. Yeah. Question. How was it first discovered? Great question. So let me jog my memory. So Stuxnet, one of the binaries, was originally submitted to an antivirus vendor. I don't remember which one. But at the time, most antivirus vendors, and still today, were using automated systems to analyze the malware. So what happened was, how did the automated systems work, by the way? The automated systems would basically take all the other antivirus scanners from the industry, scan a file with them, with those 25 other scanners. And if any scanner said it was bad, the antivirus company would say, it's probably bad, we'll write a fingerprint for it. And they would auto fingerprint the software, which has lots of problems when you have false positives, by the way. But this is how the antivirus industry works. What they do is, there's not enough people to analyze every threat. So what they do is, it's sort of collective, right? If one antivirus company in you know, Egypt detects a threat, they add it to their antivirus software. A company in the United States might run that antivirus software and say, ooh, well, they got it, so I'm going to add it to my antivirus software, the fingerprint. So Stuxnet was detected by some company as probably some unknown potential threat and auto-fingerprinted, and that caused it to be detected by at least one security product, but not one that was used at the time, as far as we know. Later on, that threat was sent to other companies because somebody actually looked at it, there was an inquiry, and somebody said, oh, what is this? You know, we saw this again in our computers, what's going on? They did the analysis, then it was escalated, people started looking at it, and then people started reverse engineering it, and then that's when we really figured out what it was. That was a long answer, I'm sorry. Other questions? Yeah. Malware authors certainly could have changed the compilation times, and it could have been fake, so it looked like Israel. Absolutely. It does seem like a smoking gun, and I can't tell you either way. But apparently, it was consistent across the binaries, and so people, you know, either they were very deliberate in making it look like Israel, or, you know, yeah.
So it was not in your. It looked like Symantec was getting real-time information on this. That's not.
We were.
We were.
Because remember, every copy of Stuxnet that was connected to the internet, when it reached a new computer, would ping the servers. Symantec took control of those domains and redirected them to its own servers. So every time a new copy of Stuxnet hit a system, we had, you know, telemetry information.
So were you realizing what was going on at the time? No.
Well, they knew that it was spreading, and they could find out where it was spreading, but they didn't know what was going on until they started digging in, until they started reverse engineering and say, oh, this is connecting to a logic controller. Why would it do that? Oh, it's connecting to a logic controller that runs at these frequencies. Oh, now let me look under my car. right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, question.
How much would you estimate it would have cost to buy like 6 0 days and also like probably like multiple teams? That are, like,
Oh, I mean, this is, I don't know. I don't know, what it would cost, but I would guess is that there are probably teams of people in the government that were working on these things, multiple governments, that they harvested them and used them for this purpose.
How do you negotiate with people to take over domains? I thought this would be next time.
So it's a good question. I don't know exactly how Semantic did it, but I think at the time we had information that this was potentially a national security threat. We went to them and said, hey, can we work with you? And for whatever reason, they agreed to do it. Maybe it was government involvement. They said, hey, this is a national security issue. I don't know. Yeah, and then others. Yeah.
How were they able to modify that executable
Right, modifying executable, even if it's a signed executable, there are parts of an executable that can still be modified even if it's digitally signed, because the signature only applies to certain parts of the file. You just open the file up with an open command with write append, and you just make changes. Yeah. Hold on, up here and then.
so was the US
That's a good question. I don't know. I know that many private companies, just cybersecurity companies were, and there was some collaboration as well. Yeah. Bill, will come up here. Yeah.
So how did this experience change or transform the security industry?
How did it transform the security industry? That's an interesting
You guys are
question.
doing business differently after this?
Yeah, people started taking security much more seriously when they realized what was possible. But I don't know that, I don't remember a quantum shift or any sort of step function that changed things. Yeah. I remember we were involved with government a lot more because there were more attacks taking place, and there are a lot of attacks like this of this caliber. Not this caliber, but above and beyond the normal. And yeah.
I mean, did you use different mechanisms for detecting that you weren't using before?
We were already using many mechanisms. So like, for instance, I showed you all the cybersecurity software was using multiple mechanisms for detecting. For instance, modifying other executable files, even if you don't have a signature of a particular file, is an indication that there's some type of Trojanization of, going on. And so all the cybersecurity software was already doing things like this. Did it accelerate that from other products, some products or other products? Maybe, but we were already doing behavior analysis, real-time behavior analysis, sequences of behaviors, looking for digitally signed files, all this stuff. So and other products were too. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have thought like nuclear facilities running on high speed network, not connected to internet. Instead, the subset was pinging a server. Like
Right, so it couldn't ping the server from the isolated network.
Yeah.
It would ping it from the research network.
okay.
Yeah. But they could then find the IP addresses were in Iran and particular region and so on. Yeah. So there was some collaboration and sharing, certainly sharing of files, which is always done in this cybersecurity industry. But this was such a hot thing that there was sort of competition. I think different companies were analyzing it on their own, and not releasing tons of details. And so there was collaboration, I do recall, but I think a lot of it was, who could get there first to figure out what was going on. Yeah.
So with regards to competition, what's sort of the incentive for is there like a government will be more contractors?
Oh, what's the incentive for being the first mover on?
Eventually it gets public disclosure.
Right. I would say that it's reputation, right? In other words, if you could be the first mover, first of all, you're going to protect your customers sooner. Although usually the moment a company has protection, they usually release the threat to all the other vendors so that everybody can help everybody, right? And they have to do that because Symantec was not going to get every threat first. It might be McAfee, well, not McAfee, so you don't have to sorry. No, it might be Bitdefender that gets a threat first. And if we don't share with Bitdefender won't share with us. So there's an incentive for sharing reasonably quickly. So there's a reputational aspect of, hey, notice for the last 5 of these threats, we got it first. That would be, help with sales and so on. Yeah, bragging rights. Other questions? Yeah. So the question is this really that impressive an attack? Because they had all the intel. Obviously, they had spies in there. They couldn't have done this without all that intel. If they just put the intel in, then it would, it's a more of a simple problem than if you didn't have the intel. I don't know. Like, obviously, it's subjective. I found it impressive because it was a combination of spycraft and engineering. They had to set up a complete infrastructure to test this out. So they probably set up centrifuges, the same PLCs. They had to ensure everything was being hidden. They had to ensure that the 0 days worked on the versions of Windows they thought were going to be used. They had to then get into the contractors that were working with Natanz and actually infect them somehow. Maybe they had spies doing that. Maybe who knows how they did that, right? Drop a thumb drive in front of the office. So everything together, maybe not the threat itself, I find super impressive. But Alan Kay, who's an emeritus faculty here and one of the inventors of object-oriented programming, asked the same question. He's like, is that really that impressive? So you're in good company. Other questions? Yeah. Oh yeah, all these things have been patched. Yeah, all these things have been patched. Yeah, Bill.
Has there been a threat like this in the past since then that's been analyzed at this level?
So I have to plead some ignorance because I haven't been in this industry doing at least this work in a good 5, 6 years, 7 years. But what I'd say is that there were some very capable threats, very advanced, but to my knowledge, not attacking sort of multiple hardware platforms like this. To my knowledge, I could be very wrong though. It's been a long time. I can tell you more about self-driving cars than cybersecurity right now, unfortunately. And I can't tell you that much about it.
I was going to say the energy industry is very concerned about this. The power plant could be taken down.
Well, power plants would be even easier than Natanz. Yeah. Other questions? Well, this is, yeah, question.
Is my laptop now better security?
Does your MacBook now have better security than Natanz? That's a great question. I don't know the state of Mac security, but Macs are susceptible to malware, as are Windows computers still. And I would say, like, for instance, if anything, Microsoft has spent a lot more time and energy on cybersecurity and hardening their platform than Apple has, at least my understanding. So, there's some chance, and again, I haven't been doing this stuff in a while, but there's some chance that your Mac is actually more insecure than a modern Windows computer. Hard to believe that is. Yeah.
Spread mechanisms didn't really say this has to be computer how to spread so much in Iran.
It's unclear why it only spread in Iran, or mostly in Iran and not other other places. It may be that it only spread, and I don't remember the details, on local area networks primarily. And so it's possible that these companies that were initially attacked, that were vendors of Natanz, maybe had subsidiaries in other countries. So maybe there's a subsidiary in Pakistan or something, or a company that was in Iran working as a contractor. Maybe that's how it got there. Maybe they had a U.S. subsidiary for some of these companies. That might be why, and maybe just spread on internal networks. Good question. I don't know the answer. I'm making this up as I go along.
If there are no other questions, let's give a round of applause for Carey. Thanks so much, Carey. That was a really great talk. And just a quick note on the way out. So since you came to speak a bit, Laura in the back has the raffle tickets. So for coming to more events, you get more raffle tickets, and there's a box outside the main room where you could submit your tickets for to win some free backpacks for the raffle. So make sure to grab one of those. Laura will be standing right at the door on the way out. Make sure to grab one of those. Yeah, thank you for coming first of all. Thank you, Carey, again. And the room is back open again. So we have another event later, but we'll make an announcement about that soon. But let's continue with the CTF.
Where's this take us?